Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. We're about to interview a very famous and very, I hate the word, we're going to use it anyway, controversial figure in American life, whose name is Dr. Robert Malone. Now, who is Dr. Robert Malone? Well, he is sometimes described as one of the people who helped invent mRNA technology, the one that is used in the corona vaccines currently. He is described by others as a provocateur, an entertainer. We're going to let him describe himself. Our own editorial comment is we believe Dr. Malone is one of the very few, and certainly one of the bravest voices in the medical community speaking out against censorship in a time of pandemic. He believes in science. So we are honored to have him in our studio now. Dr. Robert Malone, thanks very much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you.
You know what? I'm just going to start at the moment when I think, a lot changed in our country, and it'll probably be a long time before we fully metabolize what happened and your role in it, et cetera. But I'm just going to start right here, and then we can work backwards in your life. You can explain exactly who you believe you are and what you're doing. But I think you came to the attention of a lot of people who were only paying half attention. December 2021, so basically just the other day, in an exchange with Joe Rogan on his show, a lot changed for him after this conversation, in which you said the following. Here's the famous 45 seconds.
What the heck happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s? Very intelligent, highly educated population, and they went barking mad. And how did that happen? The answer is mass formation psychosis. When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety and a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it, and then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis, they literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere.
Okay. That was the moment when the cry went out. Destroy Dr. Robert Malone, destroy Joe Rogan, and they've been at it ever since. So I want to get to that in some detail, what you meant, whether it was true or not, et cetera, et cetera. But let's start with you. Tell us who you are, where you're from, how would you describe your life, since so many have described it for you recently.
Well, and I've done hours and hours and hours of podcasts talking about everything that happened at the Salk Institute and the original discoveries around RNA vaccines and all that. And it's not really useful, I think.
But give us the Cliff Notes version. Like, where did you grow up? What did your parents do? When did you get into science? Why?
Okay, that's kind of interesting. I grew up on the West Coast, particularly in the central coast of California in Goleta. I was born in Stanford University Hospital in Palo Alto. My dad was an electrical engineer. He was deep in the Department of Defense, particularly working in actually thermonuclear triggering devices and electromagnetic surge protection, high energy systems, so kind of spooky world. My mom was a teacher from Mills College.
Yeah.
And really a key figure in my life was my father-in-law, who was head of Raytheon Special Projects. So I've met numerous people from the CIA from back then that knew him.
So we should say, for people who aren't from California, a lot of agriculture, entertainment, tourism, and defense contracts really built California. And the last part, I think people who aren't from there don't know. And so your family was entwined in the last part.
Totally. And particularly in aviation, electronics. Yep. Yeah. So, and also I was involved in agriculture. I've spent a lot of time as a farmhand in avocados and lemons. Both my dad and my father-in-law had avocado groves, and I'm still married to my high school sweetheart that I met in Goleta, and our common bond was horse riding. We used to, back in the day before there was avocado fields all over the hills, we used to ride all over in the backcountry and along the beaches. The areas that we used to ride along the beaches now are the Bakar Resort, so that's like Oprah Winfrey has a place there. But back then it was just wild, old, rundown oil country land. It's all changed. I grew up about 4 miles as the crow flies from Reagan's Ranch.
Yep. Beautiful, beautiful part of the state.
and went to first Santa Barbara City College. I'm a City College grad, as was my dad, as were both of our boys, and then went to UC Davis, where I really got deep into breast cancer research and retrovirus causes of breast cancer. And the lab I was in, just serendipitously, happened to be the one that first discovered a retrovirus being involved in an immunodeficiency syndrome. This is 1983, 1984. So I kind of cut my teeth on the very earliest days of the AIDS outbreak and the development of vaccines for AIDS and those kinds of things. And I had originally been a computer science major, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a room with no windows looking at a computer monitor. And so I decided to go into medicine. Bad decision. But you know, both my sons, financially for sure, both my sons are computer scientists and they make more than I do, so they made the right decision. They were like, academia, are you kidding me? After seeing what my wife and I went through. Yeah, so I got out of computer science and went into biology and really became passionate about wanting to be a gene therapist. And it was a real stretch in the early 80s to think that you could get into medical school. Frankly, you'd have to be pretty much of an egotist to think you could do that. But I wanted to try. And it was a big reach to try to get into medical school. And I kind of overshot the goal. I got an MD PhD scholarship at Northwestern because I worked so hard in the lab when I was an undergrad. So that kind of set that in play. And I really wanted to work with RNA, and I wanted to work in gene therapy. And spent 2 years at Northwestern in Chicago, which was, my wife will never again allow me to make a relocation decision, I guarantee you.
Good call.
Yep. So we were like, hey, this is a little cold. And so I applied for grad school elsewhere. And again, kind of overshot the mark and got into the Salk Institute at UC San Diego, which had the 2 top gene therapy researchers at the time. And I was warned not to go into the Salk lab of Inder Verma by my appointed mentor from the university. But I was kind of an egotistical little son of a gun and really thought, it was a postdoctoral lab, so no graduate students. So I really, you know, I was the little kid in an intensely competitive environment in what was really the temple for vaccines and molecular virology. The Salk had about 6 Nobel laureates and had produced multiple Nobel laureates.
Yeah.
And so I was right in the thick of it. And,
I grew up hundreds of yards from there, so I remember. I mean, that was the thing that our town had.
Yeah, the Salk was, yeah, funny stories. You know, Jonas Salk, they had to change the policies of La Jolla because they wouldn't let Jonas Salk move into town. And the university basically told him, because he was Jewish.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
You know that. Okay, so you know that whole story. Fascinating California history.
Big time.
Yeah, so the Salk was a pretty tense experience, just a cascade of discoveries and events. And I was working my can off and really passionate about what I was doing and trying to find ways to ask questions about how retroviral RNA gets assembled. This is very technical. And there really wasn't stuff to do the kinds of studies that I wanted to do. And so I had to invent it. And one thing led to another. That's the short version. And suddenly things came together, and I was able to put RNA into cells, and then I was able to put RNA into frog embryos, and then I was able to put RNA into chick embryos, and then everything went sideways because suddenly people realized that this could be commercialized. And I was just a small speck in a big landscape of get rich quick. And patents were filed, and the university got in a fight with the Salk, and the Salk got in a fight with the university, and I was just kind of caught in the crossfire. And I ended up with a diagnosis of PTSD and a nervous breakdown. And
at what age?
28.
Wow.
Yeah. So I got to learn about big science, or it learned me good. And I had to stick around because my wife had to finish her bachelor's degree at UC San Diego in biologic anthropology. She was actually working at the San Diego Zoo. And so I joined this little company that was just starting up right across the street, across Torrey Pines Road, called Vical. The old cyclotron. You may,
Yeah.
You know, okay,
Very
you
well.
remember that.
I rode
Cool.
my bike on Torrey Pines every day going to school as a kid.
Yeah, the old cyclotron. So they were leasing that space out, and then I brought all my protocols and reagents and everything over, and within a couple of months we had these additional discoveries involving putting the RNA and then DNA into mice, and then it was all about how are we going to use it. I'd had a kind of a brainstorm when I was at the Salk still in Inder's lab about the problem with gene therapy. It was learned was that it generates an immune response against the foreign protein. So the whole idea that we could correct children with genetic defects went sideways because the body doesn't know that it's a good gene, it just knows that it's a different gene.
Right.
And so it'll attack that protein. That was discovered by Dan St. Louis when I was there in the lab. And that was kind of, you know, I was this young guy thinking that I was going to do gene therapy for the rest of my life, and there was going to be a gene therapist in every hospital. And suddenly that all went south. And so the brainstorm was that I had back in '87 was we could use gene therapy technology to produce immune responses. And that's kind of what set it all in motion. And then the discoveries at Vical, and there was actually 10 patents filed, but the Salk dropped theirs. They're all filed in the same time. And 9 of them issued in the United States, and then a bunch of other derivatives. And that kind of set the whole thing in play. So there's the short version. And that's only one thing I did in my life.
So what did you do for the next 30 years?
We have many other patents. I was an academic for a little over a decade, rose to associate professor, was recruited out to UMaryland, Baltimore, discovered a whole new platform using pulsed electrical fields. That gave rise to the company called Inovio that's in San Diego. We kind of pioneered that, and my wife actually did the initial incorporation. And then the planes hit the towers. We were in Rockville at the time. And the investors pulled back from Inovio. They were Norwegian investors. They were going to go to stateside. And I'll never forget, we'd had a corporate meeting 2 weeks after the planes hit the towers in Manhattan. You know, that's a smell and a scene that you never get out of your brain.
Yeah.
And of course, living in Rockville, it hit the Pentagon and the planes were circling and everything else. And our whole NUCO gig collapsed, and I was left scrambling. And a friend of mine in the government recommended a new company that had just got a big contract called Dynport Vaccine Company, and that was the company that had the contract for all biodefense products for the Department of Defense, advanced development. So that advanced development is our slang words for after it finishes with animal models and it moves into humans. And that was kind of a big transition for me. That was right after the anthrax attacks on the towers and all that. And I realized that the world really didn't need more academic thought leaders. What it needed was that people could bridge the discovery world and the advanced development world. They're very different.
Yes.
And so that was the aha, that there aren't many people that can do that. And I could become that person.
Yes.
And so I set about to become that person. And that's kind of what I've done ever since. I work closely with DOD, with a variety of companies. I've had a consulting shop for years. I worked in regulatory affairs sweatshops, writing documents and designing clinical trials. And I've worked for a bunch of different contract research organizations. I've worked for one of the early Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation companies called Eris. I was a consultant for Path, which is one of their core companies. I worked for Solvay, which is a big pharma. So I kind of, and then I'm really
Can I just
deep
pause
in
and
the
say,
government.
I don't know if anybody who didn't know your background and just knew you from that very famous appearance on Joe Rogan would have guessed that you one time worked for, indirectly maybe at least, for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for the U.S. government, and for Big Pharma.
Yeah, I've kind of seen the whole scene. Somebody reminded me the other day, Pierre Corey. We were on a talk, and he said, because I tried to help him publish his ivermectin paper, his first ivermectin review, and he said, he acknowledged at the time he just thought, this is Robert Malone, and he didn't know anything about me. I was just trying to help him, and he reminded me that back then I used to say, he asked me why I kept such a low profile, and I said, well, the way things are in D.C., the word is, if they can't see you, they can't shoot you.
That's right.
And so that had kind of always been my my operational strategy. That's
a pretty smart strategy in retrospect, don't you think?
In D.C., yeah.
You've taken a different tack now.
Just a little tiny bit. Yeah, I kind of got forced out. You mentioned this one, but before that, there was the Brett Weinstein Dark Horse podcast. And that was a moment in time. And then you may or may not recall, you and I did a Fox hit once.
Yes, I do.
The van came out to my little farm, and you asked me some questions. And what I told you, I think you weren't expecting. I told you that the database for the FDA and the CDC was all screwed up.
Yes, I remember vividly.
And you got this look on your face, because I don't think you were expecting that.
Well, this was back when I believed that there were competent people with good intentions running things.
Yeah, we've all come a long way.
We have, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so what was funny about that was I went back, because I had been having this really active dialogue, weekly Zooms, with these three folks from the FDA that were involved in the original discovery of the toxicity, the cardiotoxicity, and
of the vaccines.
Yeah, of the vaccines. And I went on. I spoke to them afterwards, and they were all really upset that I said that to you.
Because it was untrue?
No. Because you were Tucker Carlson. Because you were an enemy of the government, of the current administration, and all you wanted to do, I'll never forget, all you wanted to do was tear them down. And so one of them particularly has hardly spoken to me since, and it's okay.
I mean, it's my view, for the record, that it's my country. I grew up here, and I love the country, and I have a right to know.
So on this point, my wife hates it when I say this, but I'm going to say it again with you. Like many of us, we came out of the Central Coast of California as center-left.
Yeah.
And we actually donated to the Obama campaign. We actually donated to the Biden campaign.
Yeah.
There is no way in hell I'm ever going to vote Democratic again.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by Mickey Willis, Bobby Kennedy, these people all over. Joe Rogan, we're going to talk about Joe Rogan. He's center left.
Yeah.
I mean, they're eating their own. They're destroying their party. And so that's a tangent we'll come to.
No,
later.
I mean, I think it's really,
But I want to get back to these three folks. So we had this Zoom call afterwards, and the one of them would hardly talk to me. And one of them grew up in Eastern Germany. And the other one is Latin American. And the one that grew up in Eastern Germany said, look, we have been trying to get the CDC and the FDA to resolve this problem with the database now for over a decade, and they have refused to do anything. And he's done what should be done. In my defense, he was saying, we have to blow the thing up. So there's a lead in. Who is Robert Malone?
So, look, I can't think of anybody I've personally met who's better situated to assess, by his life experience, what's happening now. So describe the evolution of your thinking as you watch this vaccine, whose origins you were witness to and participated in, as you watched it roll out and you watched its effects. Like, what was your thinking 14 months ago, and
Yeah,
how
so
was it different?
you haven't really followed my whole origin story here. I got a phone call from a CIA or somebody. The New York Times was in my house the other day. I didn't realize until afterwards.
Don't let them in.
Bad decision. The person was actually, we found out her beat is disinformation. So, shoot myself in the head on that one. And she corrected me fascinatingly when I said, I got a call from a CIA officer. She said, ex-CIA officer. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Very well informed, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got this call on January 4th of 2020 from this guy that I'd published with in the past that had been introduced to me as a CIA officer, and I'd actually met his handler and has a Harvard appointment. And he was in Wuhan at the time. And he'd been in Wuhan in the fourth quarter of 2019. And yes, you're using that look again.
It's involuntary.
And he said, Robert, you got to get your team spun up because we got a problem with this virus. And so I've been going since then, and really since January 11th, when the Wuhan seafood market virus sequence was uploaded to the servers. And I made a threat assessment as I tracked the initial epidemiologic data and decided to focus on repurposed drugs. So there's a whole nother thread that the press doesn't pay attention to, having to do with drug repurposing. And we now have drugs in clinical trials now. But parking that with the vaccine story, I'd been tracking it, and because of the work we'd been doing with repurposed drugs, I was very aware that the virus manipulated the immune system by a bunch of different pathways, one of which was the spike protein. So I knew that the spike protein was biologically active. And I had, through this buddy network, I'd alerted the FDA as they started to roll this out, and I started to get little signals that everything wasn't right. There's something rotten in Denmark, but we're not sure what. And I said to him, you do understand that spike is biologically active. It has activities. It's not just an antigen. And they said, oh, send us the papers. Okay, so I sent them the papers, and they sent them into the review branch because that's kind of compartmentalized off. Makes sense, it's the way it should be. And it came back to me, oh, well, they don't think that this is significant, and there's no reason to slow down what's going on. So that was kind of the starting point. And then there was a series of events. This New York Times reporter really forced me to go back to the emails and track it down. And it really was triggered by Steve Kirsch, this entrepreneur,
I know Steve.
investor. Yeah, okay. So interesting guy. And Silicon Valley, bona fide. And people don't realize, Steve has a long-standing commitment, unlike some wealthy tech folks that use their philanthropy to generate more profit. Steve bona fide gives away his money, and he's invested a lot of money in trying to advance this repurposed drug called fluvoxamine. And he got it through clinical trials at WashU, and he just got stonewalled at the FDA. And he was really frustrated, and somebody told him to contact this guy Malone, who in some ways, I hate to say it, but I am kind of a fixer within the government. A friend of mine who was a Russia specialist, so there used to be folks like that in the Soviet Union, where when the bureaucracy started collapsing and failing, there were people that became experts in making the bureaucracy work, even though it didn't work. And that's kind of part of what I do for a living. So somebody tells Steve to contact me to figure out what's going on and what he should do about it. He calls me. I set up a meeting with BARDA. And it's fascinating. BARDA is this Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Agency, which gives out the big bucks within HHS for new products in biodefense. So I set up a meeting with them, and it's a fascinating moment for me where suddenly I realized I was the frog in the boiling water. That they had just turned up the heat, and I hadn't realized how thoroughly I'd been boiled up until that point, because Steve is coming in like the engineer that he is, thinking that everything should make sense. And both me and the specialist from BARDA that I brought into this teleconference are both going, yeah, that's how it should work, but that isn't how it works. And it went on and on like this, and Steve is getting more and more frustrated. And that was like the first moment where I really realized what a crazy system we have built. And I'd just become acclimatized to it. And I hadn't really thought about it.
I think we all have, but I wonder, like, what are we ignoring here? Have these vaccines worked? Have they achieved their advertised purpose?
So, according to the Washington Post, they absolutely have.
Yes.
And I am guilty of disinformation, which, according to the Homeland Security now, I'm expecting to be called a terrorist any day.
Well, it's an act of terror. We just learned.
So,
yes.
Questioning these things. So, in the speech I gave on the Lincoln Memorial, what I said was, these vaccines are clearly not working. They don't protect against infection, replication, and viral spread. The pushback from the Post was, well, they are clearly working because they're preventing infection, or they're preventing severe disease and death. The problem with that is, number one, that's not generally why you want a vaccine. That's really more a definition of a medicine. The vaccine, a prophylaxis that keeps the virus from spreading. Remember, I'm not telling you anything you don't know about all the dialogue about 7 weeks or 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yes.
And if you take the vaccine, we'll reach herd immunity of 70% of you. And then Tony says, well, I just kind of pulled that number out of a hat because I thought it's what the American population would tolerate. Blah, blah, blah. It was clear early on, really in late March, April, that we had treatments that would keep people from dying and out of the hospital, and they suppressed those treatments. And it was clear, certainly by the time Delta hit, that these vaccines were not preventing spread. And there was a CDC slide deck that was leaked to the Washington Post that clearly documented that the vaccine efficacy against Delta would, even if 140% of the population, you get the point, took the vaccine, we would not reach herd immunity. So you ask the question, do the vaccines work? Not by any standard that one would normally apply to vaccines, and certainly not with Omicron.
So I think most people watching, since they live in this country, would agree, because it's demonstrably true what you just said, right? Right. Everyone you know has gotten the vax and gotten infected anyway. Right. So, but at the same time, the government clearly has suppressed the development, and the tech companies have suppressed the transmission of information about treatments. Right. Why? What is the motive? That's what I don't understand.
So there's two big questions, and actually I give Brett credit for having kind of really first.
Weinstein?
Yeah, it was right at the end of that podcast. He kind of raised the big why question. Why and how. Yeah. Those are the two big kahunas here. The nuance of, is this working? Were there therapies available, et cetera, that's all pretty clear. But the why and how is hard to discern. One school of thought that is based in the statutes for emergency use authorization is that if there is an available agent which can provide protection against the threat, the emergency threat, and remember we're still in an emergency, right? Yeah. If there's an agent that can provide protection against the emergency and mitigate the risk, right, then it's the use of emergency use, the emergency use authorization statute will no longer apply. It's not viable.
Which makes sense.
So I asked the FDA about this specifically because this popped up as a rationale, a year and a half ago, people were talking about, what the heck is going on with suppressing early treatments. And what was going on with ivermectin and all that just didn't make any sense. Or hydroxychloroquine. I mean, hydroxychloroquine is the poster child here for what happened. And so I made a direct query, and I was told by an FDA representative, official representative, that that was not true, that they did not interpret the emergency use authorization in that way. And the case example was remdesivir, which they asserted was effective, and yet they were authorizing it and licensed it, and yet that wasn't interfering with the vaccines. I've repeatedly stated that I believe this administration and our government in general, and we can use these words like deep state or the bureaucracy or whatever, or we can just name Tony Fauci or whatever the surrogate is, and there's merit to that, but that the government is lawless. They have gone off the reservation. They've run off the rails. They don't care. They're not accountable. And we're now seeing more and more evidence that's consistent with that. And so if you want to fact check me, you can refer to the Supreme Court and the various district court findings that have overruled the mandates is just one example. The one that's popping up now that's just stunning to me is this whistleblower release of information from the DoD database, the DMSS database, in the scramble to on the fly rewrite the data. I don't know how to say it.
The data that describe what?
These are the data that describe the adverse events in the Department of Defense. So this is the Defense Epidemiologic Surveillance System. And the whistleblower, so I know Teresa Long, speak to her fairly frequently, spoke to her twice this morning. So she is the lieutenant colonel. There's 3 others, I think, total that are disclosing these data. So what happens is that...
Wait, I'm sorry, will you just, for our viewers who aren't following this particular story, tell us what those numbers suggest?
Massive increases in 2021 relative to 2020 and preceding years of multiple hundreds of percent up to 1,000% in a variety of adverse events, which is to say diseases that are suspected of being associated with the vaccine administration.
And serious adverse effects.
Yeah, like cancer, heart attack, stroke, infertility. It is stunning to me. And as I said before, I take no pleasure in finding that the things that I've been raising alarms about are those things that are popping up in this signal. Ryan Cole has been observing increased incidence of cancers and odd behaviors of cancers. To get in the nuance, cells replicating at a much higher level in a field of cancer cells than they would normally be seen in that type of cancer. And he's been observing this, but it's all anecdotal. This is just what's coming across his microscope.
Since you are one of the people in the country who understands how these vaccines work, do you think it's plausible that they increase the risk of cancer? You do?
Yes. So for some reason, and there's just a paper out today that I cited. We ran a Substack and also pushed out on Getter from an obscure journal called Cell, from an obscure university called Stanford, peer-reviewed, that demonstrates that the RNA, these synthetic RNAs, these RNAs don't have the normal chemical composition of regular RNA. Even they use a chemical called pseudouridine, which is the basis for the Carrico and Weissman claims for the Nobel Prize. So these synthetic RNAs seem to be sticking around in the body. they only test it up for 60 days. This is not how RNA is supposed to behave.
Right.
It's supposed to get degraded within hours. So for some reason, these synthetic RNAs are sticking around for a really long time, including in lymph nodes, and they're yielding levels of spike protein that is higher than that would be observed with natural infection.
Oh,
so,
come on.
So there's all this, I was originally fact-checked back in the Brett podcast days by this Facebook funded organization called Logically, based in the UK. Young person with no science background, criticizing me for saying that spike is a toxin, but spike is a toxin, and the native spike protein is clearly a toxin, and now we pretty well know that the vaccine-encoded spike is a toxin. And the thing that's been the conundrum is, why would you see more adverse events, more sickness associated with the spike from the vaccine than from the virus? Well, now we know, based on today's Cell paper, that we're actually getting a large amount of this spike protein produced in your body, circulating in your body, much higher than the level that you would get from a vaccine. And from a virus. And when you infect with a virus, you're infecting your nose and your mouth. I don't know if you've been infected. I've had it twice.
I have. I had it pretty badly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not the flu.
It's not. I'm sorry to say this. I know nothing about science or medicine or health. The second I got it, my son said the same thing to me. You realize this is not naturally occurring. No. It has effects. You're like, what is this?
Yeah. So it's not nothing. And,
it's not nothing. Oh, I agree.
But in the natural infection, it's hitting your mucosal surfaces, and the virus is growing slowly. So as your immune system is kicking in, you're getting more virus, and they're kind of fighting with each other. With the vaccine, you're getting a surge of this protein that's hitting your body, and it's coming into your whole circulation. So this paper now clearly documents that the levels are higher, the RNA is sticking around as long as they tested. 60 days is the length that they tested. It makes sense out of the vaccine injury stories that we hear, where they have persistent symptoms, much as you do with the virus for long COVID. And it kind of, what it gets to, Tucker, and this has been my core beef from the get-go, when Byron Bridle first grabbed the common technical document of Pfizer from the Japanese servers, the Japanese regulatory authorities, because the FDA won't disclose those documents, but he managed to get them from Japan. And it showed that the Pfizer and the regulatory authorities just hadn't done their job. They hadn't applied the normal standards that are used in any vaccine development or drug development program.
And meanwhile, this is a pharmaceutical product that is mandatory. You have to take it if you want to live here effectively, and that exists under government-granted immunity from legal recourse. So it's extremely frustrating to see the lack of transparency.
That's a very gentle way of saying it.
Well, people need to go to jail. That's kind of how I personally feel. But let me just ask, if it turns, do you think it's possible that we will see measurable increase in the incidence of cancer as a result of these medicines? Okay,
so here comes the caveats. That is a massive DNA data dump from the DoD, and by the way, it's being managed by a recently founded firm in Herndon, Virginia, that I believe has Chinese funding. And they assert that this problem with the database that caused the numbers to be low up until last year, and then they suddenly spiked concurrent with when the vaccine started being administered, that was an artifact because they have had a problem they hadn't recognized up until the point that the whistleblower disclosed it with this data for the last 6 years. Okay, so that's the official.
So the baseline Pentagon was artificially low up until.
That's the Pentagon's position, and that for some reason last year it was perfect, and all prior years it was artificially low. That's the official DoD position.
Okay, well, we have national, leaving aside that, I mean, that sounds like more lying, but
sounds, I think all of us believe that that's...
Right, it's sure, that doesn't sound plausible, but let's just say that it is. At some point, we're going to have, longitudinal numbers on cancer incidents or tracked.
So here's the thing, Tucker, is concurrent with this coming out, there have been reports from life insurance actuarial data. And that, as you know, that's kind of bomb-proof. That's big data from companies.
It's what they do.
It's what they do. And they do it well, because if they get it wrong by a nickel, that,
40% increase in excess death over 1 year between 18 and 64.
And that's just from one agency.
That's right.
And so now Ed Dowd is tracking who used to work for BlackRock, a really high-end analyst, is tracking the reports that are coming out from all of the other insurance industries, and they're all threading on the same line. As, by the way, and again, I take no pleasure in this, but business is really up for mortuaries.
Okay, so where we are right now, so I think it's February 8th, 2022. You've been villainized for this. Rogan's been villainized for it. I don't read my clips, but I assume I'm not as popular as I once was because I'm having conversations like this. But these numbers are so, these are big, death numbers can't be faked because
And it's all consistent.
Right. So at some point, someone's going to have to answer the question, what the hell's going on?
And I don't think they're going to answer the question until the midterms.
Okay.
Because the dynamics.
Very well.
And so I really, so the senator from Wisconsin, who I speak to frequently, and we did that second opinion hearing with.
I've known Ron Johnson since he got elected to the Senate. Something happened to Ron Johnson in the last year where he just became really fearless, and
he is pissed off.
Well, I just love watching it. Most people have changed for the worse in the last 2 years. Ron Johnson has changed for the dramatically better, and I'm grateful for it.
I really enjoy interacting with the guy.
Yeah.
The first time I met him in his office on the Hill, we were the doctors that I work with, this 17,000 physician group that I represent. Yeah. So we did a little tour on the Hill, on the House and the Senate side. I was with the Senate group, and I walked into his office, and I was expecting. It was one of those moments where I suddenly became aware of how much the media had influenced my thinking.
Yeah.
When I encounter this average Midwestern straight arrow kind of a guy.
Yeah, totally.
And I have this mental image of a crazy guy. And suddenly I have this cognitive dissonance where I realize how much my thinking has been skewed by reading the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Oh, it's so true. That's true for basically spend an afternoon with Bobby Kennedy Jr. Is he crazy?
Which I now consider him one of my friends.
Yeah, I do. I feel the same way. But if you read about Bobby Kennedy, it's he's a monster. He's a Hitler.
His family hates him.
No, he has 7 kids and they all love him. So actually, Bobby Kennedy's one of the best adjusted people I've ever met. But it's all lies. Actually, that's the truth.
So on Bobby, as I think. And I really enjoy interacting with him.
Me too.
I deeply respect him.
I
too. Think if there's anybody that deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, he is the one.
Couldn't agree more.
But think through, as I try to imagine for myself, if as a young man I had my father and my uncle brutally murdered, how damaged I would be. And I don't think I could have recovered.
No.
To become the person that he is.
And the guy was, at the age of 30, he was a drug addict. And he beat it himself and went on to lead this remarkably productive and, in my opinion, virtuous life. He really achieved something.
Yes.
Over, against horrible odds. And, I admire him.
The Monsanto lawsuit.
Yes.
Water keepers.
Exactly.
Children's health defense, fundamentally just trying to drive. And I think there's a good chance as a vaccinologist, I'm embarrassed now to learn what the actual data are about the efficacy of vaccines and what has really caused the decline in in infectious disease in children, it's the data are quite clear. That declines basically parallels the improvement in sanitation prior to the implementation of the vaccines for almost all of these pediatric diseases. And if I live long enough, I suspect that we're going to see Bobby Kennedy totally vindicated. If it's possible for people to actually look at the data.
Well, so that's my broader question to you. Is it, or has something changed in the national character where the evidence isn't really relevant anymore?
So, regulatory capture and governmental corruption. That what I think for a lot of us, not for you, credit to you, but for many of us, I used to watch CNN and read the New York Times and the Washington Post and accept it as the gospel truth of the world. Having been through the last 2 years in directly experiencing these things, experiencing how the media does things. Dana the other day, who I'm going to be on her show in a couple of days, just let it rip about what she's experienced and what she's seeing. I think for a lot of us that have been in the crucible, you cannot go through the last 2 years without being transformed and becoming acutely aware of how compromised our government is. And it's not just our government. For me, I've been dragged kicking and screaming, just resisting this whole World Economic Forum thing. And the kind of the epiphany moment for me was when I encountered the Young Leaders Program and the videos of Klaus Schwab bragging about how he has basically infiltrated all of the Western governments.
I believe Justin Trudeau participated in that, didn't he?
Justin Trudeau, Gavin Newsom, it goes on and on. Matter of fact, so one of the things we're going to do on our Substack is we're going to try to do the diligence and map the Young Leaders Program graduates to their various positions throughout the North American government structure, Canada and the United States, because they're all over.
Every neoliberal robot with power, it seems like, came through that.
And one of the characteristics they seem to share, if you look at Gavin Newsom and Justin Trudeau as two exemplars. The leader of New Zealand, just goes on and on and on, is they don't seem to be big thinkers.
No,
and
not at all.
They're very much party line people.
Yes.
And that was a confusion to me too, until I saw the website where the World Economic Forum lays out its policy positions. It's very fascinating. It's interactive. If you click on COVID-19, it shows how that relates to global warming and everything else.
Exactly.
It's all
climate change, institutional racism, COVID. It's all a matrix.
But it is.
Oh, I know.
It is. It's all there. I'm a guy that looks at the evidence. Okay, I'm like, let's see the data. Show me the data, and does it make sense out of the hypothesis, and what are the alternative hypotheses? To my eye, it looks like this set of policies have been established, policy positions, and you have all of these folks have been trained to basically regurgitate those policy positions regardless of whatever the context is within which they're operating. And so what you have is like global perspectives implemented locally through this network of acolytes that have been trained. And what's fascinating and so dysfunctional is that they're not powered intellectually or by training or whatever to adapt to these policy positions to the local environment.
Exactly.
And so we end up with diktat from a centralized global authority being implemented locally, and in the context of the response. Bobby nailed it in the last third of that book, where he went through these various training exercises they've done, and the way I like to put it is they developed a battle plan, assuming a highly lethal virus and a highly effective vaccine. For some reason, when the CIA convenes a bunch of folks to do a battle plan, they seem to come down to the need for an autocratic solution, a totalitarian solution. I can't imagine why. So they have this plan. The multiple plans have all ended in this endpoint, and they have just blindly gone along and implemented it. They never. So, I deal with the military.
So can I say, maybe that's the answer to the question of motive. Maybe these are people with sort of limited range intellectually who've been given the explanation before they even got the real life answer. And they're just, there's a highly lethal virus. This is an entirely effective vaccine. Proceed from there.
Yeah, and they never, in none of those war games have they assumed that a repurposed drug would be effective.
Well, exactly. That's exactly right.
And so it wasn't kind of in their mental space.
Because we already know it's not.
Right.
Right.
By caveat.
Right. So, which of course, by definition is the opposite of science. It's the opposite of empiricism. We're not paying attention to cause and effect. We're just but it's ideology.
It is. Okay. And so, one of my journey has, for me, in retrospect, is fascinating. And one of those, at one point, Glenn Beck asked me to be on his program, and I was on for multiple days. And before I did that, I was like, Glenn Beck, I don't know. This is, it's like, from there it goes to Alex Jones. It's just all downhill.
It was
right?
awesome.
So I was like, I don't know. Well, okay, let's try it. If I could get the message out, like Bobby said, if I can get the message out, I don't care. Okay, so I go on Glenn Beck, and we have this chat over multiple days. And at the end of it, he says, I really enjoyed this because we get politics out of it. And during the course of that, I had the epiphany that what we are going to see is a realignment politically around a different axis, not left and right, but rather collectivism versus freedom to choose.
That's right.
And I'm seeing it play out exactly like that.
Well, Naomi Wolf, one of the founders of third wave feminism, who I always imagined I had nothing in common with and didn't like, and I made fun of her many times on TV. All of a sudden, I'm texting with Naomi Wolf, and she's like the most fact-based, sincere, sort of pro-America, pro-reality person I talked to today.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So I haven't said this before. So we get a Christmas card from this interracial couple, and lovely kids and happy family. It's Ginny Thomas.
Oh, no. I know her well. I love Ginny Thomas.
She's a sweet person.
Yes.
So my whole reality framework has been flipped around.
Yeah.
And in this, I'm grateful for the openness of conservative media to engage with me and Bobby and all of my colleagues. You're the only ones that'll talk to us. And you're the only ones that seem to be open to what's going on and to really analyzing it and processing the actual information and data.
Well, I believe in our systems, and I want to live in a country that has a functioning public health bureaucracy and that has, a federal bureaucracy. My father worked for the federal bureaucracy. I want to believe that it kind of works. It's a big bureaucracy. It's not going to work well, but it should work. It shouldn't be entirely political. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I'm not sure. So that's why I introduced the WEF thread.
Yeah.
So in this progression of reveal that I've walked over time, one of the key points was connecting with Steve Bannon, who was another, if it's Glenn Beck, why not go on Steve Bannon?
What the hell?
And because, what do you got to lose?
What'd your wife and kids say, by the way, when you went on Steve Bannon?
My wife is totally behind me.
Wonderful.
My kids really would prefer that I didn't talk about my kids.
Right? I know the feeling.
Okay, so
how about your friends? Were people like, whatever happened?
It's split. the world is split now along a different line.
Yeah.
But where I was going to go with Steve is he started to use the term the Party of Davos, and I think that's more than just political slang.
Oh, I agree.
I think it captures. I do think I've been dragged into this, but I'm now of the opinion that we have had a 30-year effort to subvert the Western democracies by a group of people that are backed by big money that believe in the concept of a centralized government for the world. And I have spent enough time at the World Health Organization and dealing with Europeans and EMA folks to know that the culture that gives rise to that is deeply dysfunctional, and that dysfunctionalism becomes particularly apparent during times of rapid change where you have to have leadership. This consensus committee decision making is horrible when you have a crisis. And we are watching it play out. And just to your audience, here's my argument. Even if you aren't committed to freedom to choose and personal liberty, even if you are inclined to buy into the idea of the benefits of a centralized government, which I'm not. I think diversity is a good thing in governments.
Amen.
But even if you were, after seeing the last 2 years, is this the cast of characters that you want to give up your liberties for?
No.
They are grossly incompetent. I don't see how you can make any other conclusion.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I mean, it's the theme of our show at night. And as someone who spent his life in Washington, it's a source of discouragement every day, watching this.
Creeping.
I just want to go out on this. I want to ask you about, I'm sorry to keep going back to this Rogan thing. I've never met Rogan. I don't know Rogan at all. But this moment was a huge change, not just for you, I think, but it was certainly a change for Rogan. I mean, after this interview, his enemies redoubled their efforts to take him down. And we're sort of, as this is being shot, I don't know when this is going to air, but as of right now, his kind of future is, my judgment is it's kind of up in the air. But they've really gone after him since
So
this.
there's some hard lessons, and I find it fascinating because I assume Joe, so I really enjoyed the guy. But, I was a carpenter and a farmer. And I live in a red county and I run a horse farm. So I was totally comfortable.
Oh, I admire Rogan. I'm not criticizing him in any way.
I'm not saying you are.
Yeah.
I'm saying on a personal level.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed interacting with him and hanging with him.
Yeah.
But I find his response to this fascinating. A journalist, Christy Lynn, pinged me with his first hostage video that was on Instagram.
Sad.
And I was sitting around a campfire in Maui at the time, and this thing comes across, and I'm like, and my first reaction is, do I got tire tracks across my back or being thrown under the bus? And then it rolled out, and we watched it a little bit more. I think he is, as I look back at what's happened, I think he's been a little naive. I think that he didn't recognize, and it's part of the blindness. I think he genuinely represents a center-left, blue-collar frame of reference.
Yeah.
And they have just really damaged that cohort, those that are on the left. They've basically just alienated a whole fraction, just having already pissed off the moms and the African Americans with all of these policies, and a lot of the youth that have been subjected to mandated vaccines. Now they've alienated blue-collar center people and unaligned people, which is really what Rogan represents, particularly younger ones.
Yes.
Okay. But Joe bent the knee. He thought that he could concede and they would leave him alone if he basically apologized. And that is not how this game is played.
No.
This is full-on media war. And you don't get a break by saying, I'm sorry.
No.
And then then it comes out, the next reveal is that Neil Young has financial conflict of interest, having sold a large fraction of his portfolio to BlackRock. And then it comes out that with the, I'm not going to name the words that were used, the N-word repeatedly was pulled out, and you could do the same thing to the president by going back to his old clips if you wanted to, if you were so inclined. And it comes out apparently that the group that made this little attack cropped clip that resulted in Joe's second hostage video on Facebook, fascinating. First one was on Instagram. If I go to Facebook, was this left-wing super PAC that is Midas Light or
Midas
something?
Touch.
Yeah, Midas Touch, with a misspelling of Midas as if it was media. Apparently they want to have his head on the wall because it's going to help them with future fundraising. And it has nothing to do with vaccines. It has nothing to do with me and Peter McCullough. And the proof of that in the pudding is if they really cared about the vaccine story, then they would have hit Bobby, who also has a Spotify channel. But nothing. This was about taking out Rogan. And I think Rogan was perceived as a threat on multiple levels. It wasn't just that he was a good trophy to hang on your wall if you want to gin up more capital for your Hollywood-based super PAC, which is what we're dealing with here. Was it Three Brothers, I think, that are about this? But what Joe did wrong was this appeasement. You cannot do that with these people, and that's the lesson, the same lesson that I just am about to get good and hard from the New York Times, I'm sure, by letting them into my house. It was presented to me, they're going to write this story about you anyhow, and so you might as well let them interview you. But it's not, they're not about fair. It's not about objective analysis or reporting of facts. It's full-on media war.
Do you remember the reporter's name who came into your house?
Danny or something, Davy. Davy, I forget her last name, but I've got her texts and stuff. But so that'll come out. But the point is that Joe's story, it was all spun. Glenn Greenwald did two that were really useful about, one was back when he was with The Interceptor back last fall.
Yeah.
And he did a piece about how they were coming for Joe Rogan back then. And then he did another one after all this broke, and he turned on the media, as he does these days, and listed all of their misinformation and pointed out this has nothing to do with misinformation, and gave multiple examples. This is about political warfare and information warfare, full stop, and all of this chatter that many have bought into, that this is about culture wars, or it's about vaccines. No, it's not. It's about power and money. It's about Spotify's market cap dropping. So fascinating point is that the major owner of Spotify, the top owner of Spotify, is also the top owner of Moderna. Yes. Okay. So we have to kind of get out of the frame of reference that that's being pitched to us, that this is about culture wars, because it's about way more than culture wars. It's about power and money. And culture wars is a nice, easy way to divide us against ourselves.
Right. Boy, this moment has changed you.
So the question that we face, my wife and I, is what next? Because the good news is that the emergency is over, my friends. It was over in March or April of 2020 when we figured out how to treat this with early drugs. This has just been the kabuki ever since. It's been the passion play. And this emergency declaration has got to stop. And when it stops, the whole house of cards collapses, because all of this emergency use authorization and all of these other extra constitutional things that they've laid out on us, and constraining our freedoms, forcing the masks, stopping economic activity, all that kind of stuff that the science says is absolutely unjustified, that all stops. As Bobby laid out these three things on his Lincoln Memorial speech, that set the MSNBC on fire, right? They just lost it over the ending of his speech where he says, you have to remember these three things. And basically what he's saying is when they grab power, they don't give it back unless you force them to give it back.
Yeah.
That's the core message. And it's time to do that. But
that's where I am.
Yeah, it's time now. We have to force them to give back these extraordinary powers. They are extra-constitutional. They are not justified. There is no crisis. The Omicron has destroyed the narrative, as I predicted with Laura before Christmas. I took a risk with that one. But bless her heart, she validated me afterwards and thanked me for having done it. I mean, you guys have been really kind to me. The other day, you know, when I was on, and so many kind things were said about, you know, in that little segment right after yours with Hannity. It was nice to be treated nicely, really nice.
Well,
but I think, so now we're pivoting to what next? Because this thing is wrapping up. It's over. It's just the end game now. They have blown it. If the Senate flips, Ron is running again because he is mad as hell, and he's going to get to the bottom of this, and he will be able to force the hearings, and these documents will come out, and there's going to be no place left to hide. And what the ugly truth is that's come out of this, and Pierre Corey is on fire over this right now. Paul Merrick also, Pierre Corey of FLCCC,
yeah,
highly qualified intensive care physician. HHS is deeply corrupted, soup to nuts. Our whole healthcare system is. Our hospital system is.
I've noticed.
Our fellow physicians.
And individual physicians have shown profound cowardice, I would say, over the past 2 years. Disgusting, actually.
What are we going to do?
I couldn't agree more. We're all going to be using CBD oil, you know, at home because everyone's going to be too afraid to go to the freaking doctor because they've displayed such bad judgment,
so there was a guy,
bad character.
There was a guy after World War II named Vannevar Bush.
Yeah.
Who came in on presidential order and restructured our whole research enterprise. And I'm getting people saying, oh, you should run for this office or that office or hope to get an appointment in the next administration. And I don't want to sit in an office and have to genuflect to, you know, my House leader or my Senate leader or whatever. But I would love to be involved in a commission and potentially participate in some Vannevar Bush-like initiative to really look soup to nuts at what we've done here.
Well, yeah, because clearly this isn't the way a great nation behaves. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your coming in today, Dr. Robert Malone, and for your bravery and for the risks you've taken. You didn't need to do anything like what you've done, but you did it anyway, and I'm grateful that you did.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Dr. Robert Malone, not an entertainer, a scientist. Tucker Carlson today is the name of the show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here on Fox Nation. Of course, we will continue to come to you relentlessly, without ceasing, every weeknight, 8 p.m.